Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth on Friday, he announced that the United States was signing a letter of acceptance to build the Qatari Emiri Air Force facility in Mountain Home Air Base, Force Base in Idaho. So they would also host Qatari F-15 aircrafts and pilots. Hegseth said that he praised it and said this was just another example of our partnership with Qatar. But this was met with serious backlash, Scott, even from conservative MAGA supporters, including Laura Loomer and Steve Bannon, who questioned why you would host a foreign military base on American soil. So this backlash happened. Hegseth was then forced to downplay what he meant. And then he wrote on X saying, important clarification, the US military has a long-standing partnership with Qatar, including today's announcement cooperation. However, to be clear, Qatar will not have their own base in the United States, nor anything like a base. We control the existing base like we do with all of our partners. But even after all of this, conservatives are still angry, Scott, because they're saying Qatari military personnel will still be based and training on American soil. So what is this?
Okay. First of all, let me throw you a complete swerve here. And that is, I'm actually going to say that Pop Gun, he actually is the innocent in this case. Surprise, surprise. And I'm going to tell you a much more serious story, which is going to link to Qatar and link back to Gaza. The immediate story is that the Qatari Defense Secretary is over in Washington, and he does the press conference alongside Hegseth. And Hegseth is reading from a prepared statement, right? Whoever drafted the statement screwed up because they didn't. This is in Idaho. And what it is it is a facility that you train Qatari Air Force pilots on the use of F-35s, fighter jets, which the U.S. is giving to Qatar. And there's pretty good reason for that. Qatar doesn't have a huge amount of airspace. If you notice the country where it is, tucked away in the Gulf, and so you got more space up there in the American West. And when Hegseth reads it out, he does not use the word base. He used the word, that this is a Qatari Emiri facility, right? But the statement did not make clear that it was a facility under U.S. jurisdiction, right? In other words, it gave the misleading impression, oh, the Qataris have got their own little space here on U.S. soil. Now, it is quite common for foreign military personnel to be trained on U.S. bases. That's been there for many, many decades, right? Because you have great training facilities, so you bring your allies over, you train them up. And if they had explained that quite clearly, they would not have gotten nearly the heat that they did. But because it was a mangled statement, which they then had to clarify, you got in particular the raging Islamophobe Laura Loomer. Now, Laura Loomer has no elected position. She has no administrative position. She has no particular expertise, but she is the whisperer in the ear of the Trump administration when she decides that they need to get rid of somebody or that someone's transgressed them. So she goes on to X and calls out those millions of followers because she is an Islamophobe. How dare we have Muslims with a base on U.S. soil? And she's still at it today, even after the clarification. Well, that clearly puts the wind up the administration because, again, as we've talked about with the Epstein case, when it's your own people who are coming after you, right? And it's to the point today where Loomer's saying, I'm not going to vote for the Republican Party. And then other people are coming back who are saying, good, we don't care, off you trot. And so you just wonder how far that kind of goes, and we'll watch that. But here's the serious part of this, Maddie, which because this, you always got to watch about things that kind of distract from us. It's like, why are the Qataris getting this facility, and why are they getting such a high-profile announcement of it? And if you have a couple minutes, let me tell you a story that is a better story than who should get the Nobel Peace Prize. On September 9th, Israel violated the sovereignty of Qatar by trying to assassinate Hamas leaders that are there. Now, Israel trying to assassinate Hamas leaders, big damn deal. They've done that throughout the past 2+ years. Israel going into the territory of an American ally, which hosts the biggest American military base in the Middle East and has done so for quite a long time and carrying it out, that's huge. Because not just Qatar, but the other Gulf states, Saudi Arabia and UAE are looking at this and going, can we actually trust the Trump administration on anything if they're going to allow this type of crap to happen, right? So that's one factor. Here's the other factor that comes into play. You might have heard of a guy named Jared Kushner. He's been in the news recently. Donald Trump's son-in-law, and as the New York Times puts it, Jared Kushner, he used his New York real estate expertise to be able to swing the Gaza deal. Well, New York Times, whom I've not been happy with because they do your damn job, folks. Get to the story. Here's a New York real estate story with Jared Kushner. Phase one, Jared Kushner was in trouble in 2016 because he was on the hook for almost $2 billion for a property in New York. 666, I think it was Fifth Avenue. I'll double check that later. He was trying to find finance for it to cover the fact that he could not cover the loans. Ultimately, he goes to Gulf states. One of the Gulf states that helps get Kushner off the hook on that loan, ding, 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 Qatar. But phase two, when Jared Kushner, when Daddy is no longer in the White House, Kushner goes back into business. He launches a huge investment fund. That investment fund, which needs to turn a profit, who's bankrolling it? $2 billion from Saudi Arabia, $1.5 billion from Qatar. If this September 9th attack by Israel and Qatar threatened America's military position in the Middle East, America's alliances, and it threatened economic projects that include, by the way, a $5.5 billion Trump resort and golf course in Qatar. So something had to be done. The Gulf states, as well as Turkey, went back to the Trump people, which includes Trump, Jared Kushner, and let's not forget, Trump's envoy, real estate developer, Steve Witkoff, and said, if you don't do something about Netanyahu, everything is going to go up, even worse than it is now. And Trump, if you want to give him credit for this, then began to lean on Netanyahu. It was that convergence that brought us Gaza. But of course, while you have the Gaza story play out as we've just discussed, how does the U.S. play this out with Qatar? What they did before they announced this base is even more interesting and also caused some real ruction in Washington to watch. There is something called an Article 5 guarantee in NATO, where if one of NATO's members attacked, you come and provide assistance to that. The United States, for the first time, gave effectively a version of an Article 5 guarantee to a Middle Eastern state not named Israel, and that state was Qatar. In other words, if Israel attacks Qatar again, the United States gave the assurance they would come in and defend, right? So there's going to be a lot to play out politically, but the immediate effect of this is the U.S. government had to show Qatar, look, we're your good pals.
That agreement that they wrote for Qatar, it even included military interference if necessary, it said, which is more that they've done for Ukraine.
Yeah,
which was
absolutely.
just ironic. But I want to move on because we don't have long.
Yeah,
Sources
sure.
are telling MSNBC that a federal grand jury in Maryland has been considering charges against former National Security Advisor John Bolton for weeks. John Bolton, who comes on the Trump Report, he is reportedly about to be indicted on criminal charges potentially as early as next week, tying him to keeping classified government documents at his house after leaving government. His lawyer maintains that he's done nothing wrong. But, Scott, this is the third former critic of Trump, including James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James, to face indictment. So, I mean, are we looking at this situation thinking that Trump is operating his own witch hunt?
What does an authoritarian do? He goes after his political enemies. I mean, it's as simple as that. The Justice Department does not function as an independent department to protect the American people. It now functions to carry out Trump's orders. Hi, Pam Bondi. It was great talking about you in our last discussion. I'm sure she's still doing great work. And so, you know, Trump put out an enemies list that he wanted the Justice Department to prosecute. Indeed, in one of the stunning moments, why we know this? Because he meant to send a direct message to Pam Bondi on Truth Social, and he sent it as a tweet, right? Pam, why are you not doing your job? Go get these people, right? And so the first one who went was Comey on a case that has almost no evidence. How did Trump do that? Trump did that by putting in one of his personal attorneys who had no prosecutorial experience when the previous prosecutor resigned and said, I'm not going to do this. And so Trump put this person in, Lindsay Halligan. Guess who Lindsay Halligan showed up to file the indictment on this past week? Letitia James, the New York Attorney General. Let me give the basic facts and then give you the stinger in the tail of this and why it may be more, not just John Bolton, but it might be the former special prosecutor, Jack Smith, who did the investigation of January the 6th. And 2 minutes and I'll wrap this all up for you, nice and smooth. Here we go. So Letitia James is the person who successfully, and I emphasize that word successfully, prosecuted the Trump Organization, which had to pay one of the largest settlements in New York State history, ultimately more than $500 million, or they were ordered to pay it. It's now on hold because an appellate court has said maybe it's excessive, but they were found guilty of one of the most serious frauds in New York State histories. Not my words, the words of the judge. This case was, I can go through the evidence. There was substantial evidence that they had committed fraud over their valuations, both for tax and for loan purposes, specifically valuation of properties. Trump doesn't like when he loses, and he doesn't like it when he possibly loses money. So he goes after Letitia James. How does he do that? He puts in the personal attorney, Lindsay Halligan. And here's where the story gets interesting. Letitia James had bought a property for her grandniece in Virginia, about $135,000 property. The claim of the prosecutors is that she lied that it was her primary property. From what we know about the case, it appears that the most serious thing that she might have done is she might have accidentally checked a wrong box. Everything else was in order on the mortgage application. But by ticking that box, there's a guy named Bill Pulte, who is a Trump lackey, who's the head of the Federal Housing Mortgage Administration, FHMA, who has access to everyone's mortgage records. He combed these records of Trump's so-called political enemies to try to find something. He then teamed up with a Justice Department official, a lawyer with a very checkered record named Ed Martin. They put this together because they want to serve the master. So that's why they go after Letitia James. At the very least, it inconveniences her. She's got to hire lawyers. She's got to show up in court. Trump wants to tie down his folks, and he wants to belittle American belief in the rule of law. Because here's the stinger. If he can do it to a former director of the FBI, if he can do it to a former attorney general, if he can do it to a man who was national security advisor, if he can do it to a man who was a special prosecutor, no one who serves as a judge, as a prosecutor, as an investigator, no one is safe. It's Trump ruling by fear. And I'll tie this all together. There's a man named Stephen Miller, who is perhaps the most important person after Donald Trump in the Trump administration. Stephen Miller did two things this week that are telling. But first of all, he said that Donald Trump can do anything he wants to because he has plenary authority. Now, that doesn't exist as a concept in U.S. law. There's no such thing as plenary authority, but that's what Miller claimed it. This is the same Stephen Miller who, when a judge ruled against the Trump administration this week in one of the myriad cases over migrants, over tariffs, over military in U.S. cities, said these radical judges are illegitimate. So make no secret about it. It is serious for Letitia James, but it's also serious as part of what's happening in the United States system, because you are at the authoritarian moment, whether or not, well, next year, Maddie, you and I could be talking about the first authoritarian in U.S. history to win the Nobel Peace Prize. Won't that be a happy day?
Scott Lucas, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report.
Thank you.